Hello, friends. Tonight we enter a world where survival doesn't depend on heated blankets or hot cocoa, but entirely on whether the fire burns long enough to keep your feet from freezing. Just imagine the wind outside howling like a pack of hungry wolves, your home made of sticks smeared with mud, and the only insulation is hope. Welcome to a medieval winter, where staying warm means sleeping next to a cow and praying the roof doesn't cave in during the night. Honestly, if we were dropped into that situation now, most of us wouldn't even make it to the hay pile before begging to go home. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always love knowing friends from all over are gathering around this fire. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're trudging across frozen ground, carefully placing your feet to avoid the slick spots where mud has hardened into stone. No waterproof boots, no triple-layered wool socks, just a scrap of cloth wrapped around your feet, and the hope it doesn't come loose when you wade through the pitch-black chicken coop. The wind slips through every gap in the mud walls, whistling like someone calling from the graveyard. And the good news? That's not even the worst part of tonight, because you still have to sleep on a foul-smelling straw mat next to your cousin, your grandmother, and a very enthusiastic snoring pig. There's no such thing as personal space. The only things evenly distributed are body heat and the sound of farts. But don't click away just yet, because strangely enough, through all of this, medieval people survived. Not just survived, they built communities so densely populated that modern historians still wonder, how did an entire village not perish in one winter, living in a cow dung-plastered hut with no windows and no clean water? Some archaeologists believe the secret lay in segmented sleep. You'd sleep a few hours, wake up to tend the fire, then switch shifts. Kind of like how you monitor your phone charging during a blackout, except if you fall asleep on fire duty, the whole family might literally freeze. It's a joke, but just barely. Fun fact, back then, it was believed that breathing deeply through your mouth in winter was basically slow suicide. Inhaling cold air directly was seen as the fastest way to catch pneumonia. So children were taught early, breathe through your nose softly. Don't pant like a dog. Advice worth more than a wool scarf. Of course, not everyone agrees with the biphasic sleep or night shift theory. Some scholars argue that this memory was exaggerated by literature or clerical accounts. But honestly, if you've ever slept on a cold pile of straw with 6 people and a goat, you'd invent shift rotations too. And then, as the night deepens and the wind begins to carry the scent of snow, you curl up tighter, pulling your garment over your nose, listening to the crackling of a fire slowly dying. It's not a peaceful sleep, but if you wake up in the morning with all 10 toes intact, congratulations. You've survived a medieval winter night. You're jolted awake by a thump right beside you. Not an earthquake, not a nightmare, just the hen from the ceiling beam falling onto your cousin's head. Third time this week. It still hasn't figured out that human hair isn't a suitable nest. You try to fall back asleep, but the cold creeps into your back like a stubborn cat, slipping through the layers of cloth. The fire is almost out. Smoke coils lazily under the roof, stinging your eyes and making it feel like you're sleeping inside a very poor man's version of a Scandinavian sauna. In the middle of the tiny house, the only room really, is the hearth, the one thing keeping the family from turning into ice sculptures. But it's also the most dangerous. There's no chimney. The smoke just swirls in circles, the roof like an upside-down skillet. And you? You're the unwilling slice of smoked bread. Strange fact? That smoke helped keep bedbugs away. Yes, in misfortune, there's slightly less misfortune. Some scholars argue that people back then lived in conditions too polluted to get sick, as bacteria struggled to thrive in such thick smoke. Others believe the smoke was why average life expectancy was so short that turning 30 was both a birthday and a farewell party. You roll over, a careful maneuver, because if you kick grandpa, you'll likely get scolded or stepped on in return. There are no blankets, just an old cloak, a stiff piece of goat hide, and the hope that shared body heat can keep the wind from slicing through the cracks in the walls. Someone coughs in the darkness, a dry, weary cough. You recognize that sound. This winter will take someone. It always does. You don't cry, not because you're tough, but because crying will clog your nose, and a blocked nose in a medieval winter is a recipe for a very miserable night. Historical event? In the 14th century, a prolonged cold period called the Little Ice Age forced millions across Europe to grapple with longer, colder, deadlier winters. In 1315, relentless rains led to massive crop failures. That was a winter not just of cold, but of hunger. A winter so dire that rumors spread of people boiling leather shoes to eat. But back to you. In this straw-filled house, even without toast or hot water, there is still something that holds you. The sounds. The steady breathing of your mother, the gentle clucking of chickens in the dark, the faint thud of falling firewood, like someone tapping softly on your heart, reminding you you're still here. You clutch a thin woolen cloth close and breathe slowly through your nose, just as Grandma taught. Breathe gently. No panic. No resistance. Winter is just a difficult guest, and you, a stubborn host, refusing to surrender. You're curled up in the warmest corner of the house, which is about a meter from the hearth, and not yet claimed by the cow. You've just managed to doze off when it's your turn to tend the embers. Don't think this is a simple task. Back then, letting the fire go out at night was as good as signing a death warrant, and you know that better than anyone. No lighters, no matches, just flint, steel, and a sincere prayer. And your hands are freezing. Every time you strike a spark and it fails to catch, you can almost hear the ancient god of heating whispering encouragement from afar. You got this, kid! That's why medieval people came up with a strange but effective trick, burying the fire in ash. Near bedtime, they would rake the glowing coals into the center and cover them with a thick layer of ash. The ash acted like a small blanket, retaining heat and protecting the embers until morning. Done right, you just nudge them and the fire would flare back up. Done wrong, well, you know, cold lungs and smoky breath all day long. It sounds simple, but this art of banking the fire was so intricate it even sparked academic debates over how ash affects oxygen flow in open hearths. Some historians believe this method laid the foundation for modern slow cooking. Others say, no, it was just how our ancestors avoided having to relight the fire. Either way, there's no denying it was a life-saving invention. And if you thought banking the fire was their only clever idea, meet the hot stone. Back then, a flat stone was placed into the hearth until it was almost burning, if rocks could burn. Then, using iron tongues or wooden sticks, it was pulled out, wrapped in coarse cloth, and placed at the foot of the straw bed. Not exactly an electric heating pad, but just enough to keep you from turning into a human popsicle. Of course, things didn't always go smoothly. Some people didn't wrap the stone properly, resulting in scorched beds. Some rolled onto it in their sleep and woke up with beautifully round burn marks on their calves. One scholar joked, the shortage of beds wasn't due to population growth, but because people kept setting theirs on fire. You're sitting beside the hot stone now, watching it radiate weak warmth through the cloth. Outside, the wind has softened its howls. Inside, people are slipping back into fragmented sleep, like fading puzzle pieces. You know the night is far from over, but with a little warmth at your feet, a few embers under the ash, and a bit of hope, you just might make it through another night. You're burrowing into the straw when your mother calls from the fire. Have another bite, warm your belly. You sigh, not because you're full, but because you know what that another bite is. A thick, grayish-brown porridge steaming faintly and smelling like turnips and onions have been arguing with each other for 3 days straight. The Middle Ages didn't offer many options for midnight snacks, but they did discover one simple, sensible truth. Eat more, stay warm longer. When your stomach's busy digesting, your body generates heat. And in bone-chilling cold, that could save your life. The evening turnip porridge was practically a ritual. Turnips, onions, a few barley grains, some salt, simmered until there's no need to chew, just surrender. And if you were incredibly lucky, there might be a small piece of pork fat the size of your finger. Pure luxury. People didn't eat to feel full, they ate to stay alive. As for the taste, well, let's call it rich in history. Historical fact. In the 14th, 15th centuries, the diet of English and European peasants shifted due to harsh winters and the scarcity of meat. Historians call this the era of the slow-calorie transition, thanks to root vegetables, grains, and animal fats. It wasn't malnutrition, as often assumed, but a carefully paced way of eating to release energy slowly through the night. An interesting story? Some records note that eating too much during a winter night didn't just make you full, it also made you dream a lot. Strange, long, vivid dreams, sometimes interpreted as prophecies or just the result of spoiled turnips. Some people dreamed of flying, others of being chased by a herd of talking goats. Most likely they had too much garlic before bed. Of course, the debate continues. Some historians reject the connection between winter food and weird dreams. They argue the dreams simply stemmed from sleeping in stressful, overcrowded, and poorly ventilated conditions. But modern research suggests that heavy nighttime meals can affect the REM cycle, meaning your dream tonight might be cooked right in your porridge pot. You sit there, wooden spoon loosely in hand, warm turnip porridge sliding down your throat. A strange, contented warmth spreads from your stomach to your limbs like an invisible blanket. Outside, snow has begun to fall gently. You hear the soft tapping on the straw roof. Inside, someone has started to snore. The cow beside you exhales a long, warm breath like a walking furnace. You know the night still has more in store. Maybe cold, maybe wind, maybe a strange dream about chickens dancing around a singing turnip. But at least, with a belly full of porridge and a hot stone at your feet, you're ready for the silent showdown between humankind and the ancient winter. Perfect. Now, imagine you're tucked in a tiny corner of a house only slightly bigger than a chicken coop. On your left are your parents, on your right, your two younger siblings, and by your feet, your grandmother. And if you hear a slow, wheezy breathing behind your back, congratulations, you're sleeping next to a dairy cow. It wasn't by accident that medieval people kept livestock in the house. Warmth. That was the only reason you needed. In a brutal winter, every breath of a cow, every sneeze from a goat, every soft grunt from a pig was precious warmth. You open your eyes in the dark. Everything is silent, except the snoring, layered and coming from Uncle snoring in tenor. Probably your uncle snoring in tenor with the pig adding a bass harmony. You carefully not to bump into the goat, because last time it startled and kicked you square in the nose. Strange fact, in many medieval rural areas, people didn't just bring animals inside, they assigned sleeping spots based on thermal value. Cows, the warmest, slept next to humans, goats and sheep in the middle. Chickens and pigs, moderate warmth, were placed farther away. Cats, they picked their own spot, usually right on your chest when you were trying to breathe. Historical event. From the 13th to 15th centuries, records from Scandinavia, England, and France show that typical rural houses were longhouses, a single long building, half for humans, half for livestock. No walls, just a shallow trench down the middle to separate and drain waste. You might think, that must have smelled awful, and you'd be right. But you forget one thing. People didn't bathe daily. Their noses adapted. Over time, they stopped noticing the animal stench. Meanwhile, the scent of soap, that was more luxurious than pearls. Interestingly, anthropologists still debate the psychological impact of co-sleeping with livestock. One side argues it strengthened community bonds and gave people a sense of safety. You were never alone. The other side counters that it likely caused stress, chronic sleep disruption, and the occasional accident of kicking a horn in the dark. And you, the one lying between the humans and the beasts, are beginning to feel warm. The smell of hay, smoke, and goat skin mingles into something indescribable, but oddly soothing. You burrow deeper into your cloak, your back resting gently against the cow. Soft, warm, and slightly damp. A chicken flaps its wings in a dream. Your younger sibling smacks their lips and snuggles into grandma's belly. The goat shifts, resting its hoof on your leg. And in that moment, in the middle of a pitch-black winter night, surrounded by the messy, living tangle of humans and animals, you smile. Because even though it's cramped, stuffy, and full of smells, you are surrounded by life. The only force that can defeat the cold. You open your eyes. It's still dark. The wind is still howling. The cow is still breathing steadily beside you. But your body is awake. Not fully alert, but no longer dreaming either. Welcome to the first sleep, the first 3 to 4 hours of the night when the body sinks deeply into recovery mode. After that, People of the time would wake naturally in the middle of the night, not because of any disturbance, but because their biological clock was wired that way. This pause between two phases of sleep often lasted 1 to 2 hours. During that time, people would pray, talk, write in journals, sometimes snack, or engage in marital activities. No one thought it was strange. It was known as the sacred quiet hour, a time when, according to popular belief, the soul could most clearly connect with God. Some sources even say that monks chose this in-between period to read scripture, believing that the human mind was sharpest and the soul cleanest at that hour. Yet modern scholars have pushed back. There's no solid scientific proof that biphasic sleep is a better state. They suggest it was simply a side effect of not having artificial light. When darkness stretched over 12 hours, the brain had no choice but to break up sleep to avoid sinking too deep. Whichever side is right, you are here, resting in that strange, magical pause of the night. Everything is so still. You can hear the crackling of the firewood, the pig exhaling a dreamy little grunt, and even the rhythm of your own heartbeat as you pull your cloak up to your nose, covering even the scent of goat. What's stranger than this? There is. People back then believed that if you woke up between the two phases of sleep and saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of your bed, it wasn't a family member, it was someone else, whether a deity, a ghost, or an omen, no one knew for sure. So they often avoided looking directly at doors or into the darkness during these midnight hours. You decide not to look at anything. You just lie still, listen, and feel. The cold has softened. It's no longer biting, but more like a dry blanket wrapping around everything in silence. One of your siblings begins to stir. Grandma rolls over, still clutching her prayer beads. On the far side of the hearth, your father whispers something to your mother, maybe about tomorrow, or perhaps about the turnips that have started to wilt. You know, in just a little while, the second sleep will come, lighter, slower, filled with more dreams. But right now, you're living in a moment the modern world has lost. The space between dreams, when no one is working, no one is scrolling, no one is staying up late. They are simply existing. Gently, peacefully, and strangely more connected than ever. You shift your body. The mattress beneath you rustles, lumpy, and something definitely just poked your ribs. It's fine, you're used to it. It's the traditional straw mattress, a large burlap sack stuffed with hay, straw, or anything softer than stone you could beg, cut, or steal. The problem? Straw flattens. Fast. Really fast. After a few weeks, it's like lying on an old loaf of bread stomped on by a cat, and when the rainy season hits, the mattress absorbs moisture like an ancient sponge. Mold? Guaranteed. Fleas? Familiar. That little crack sound every time you roll over? Yes, that's the sound of dreams and parasites being crushed. Little known fact, medieval people didn't change bed sheets often. In fact, most didn't have sheets as we know them. Maybe one coarse linen layer laid down and left there for months. In some places, they only changed it when the fabric started to move on its own. And if you're imagining a pillow, don't picture a feather-stuffed luxury from a mattress commercial. Many people had no pillow, or if they did, it was a sack stuffed with straw, or a rounded log like the kind used in Buddhist temples. Some European regions believed sleeping with your head too high would make blood rush to your legs and cause sleepwalking. An amusing detail from 14th century English folklore. Some households used communal neck pillows, a long shared log, and where your head ended up, that was fate's decision. As for sleepwear, forget it. No one changed into pajamas. You wore what you wore all day, and if it got cold, you added layers, not removed them. The smell of sweat, smoke, cow dung on your hem, soup broth on your sleeve, all of it stayed warm with you through the night. Silk nightgowns, only for nobles. And even they rarely washed them, because washing was more work than sleeping dirty. One scholar once proposed a strange but intriguing theory, that layering multiple garments at night created a sort of personal heat nest where your own body heat was trapped, like a biological sleeping bag. Some experts disagreed, saying it increased the risk of skin diseases and infections, especially when sleepwear was shared across generations. No joke. You're still lying there, head resting on an old straw sack, your whole body wrapped in 3 layers, the innermost being your work shirt, still dusty with soot. Over that, a cloak, and your blanket, half a burlap sack. Warm? Maybe. Comfortable? Depends on your standards. But most importantly, you're not shivering. And in a medieval winter, that's a resounding victory. You look up toward the thatched roof where the moonlight shines faintly through a tiny hole. The wind still howls outside, but inside, you, your family, and a few livestock are huddled together in a heap of breathing, scent, and snores. And you feel safe. Not because of a magical straw bed or a wooden pillow, but because you know everyone here is trying to survive this cold together. Winter wind isn't just cold, it's bold. It sneaks through every crack, every gap, every space the size of a needle's eye. And you, a true medieval resident, have become a master at fooling the wind. Your home, like most others, is built from wattle and daub, wooden frames woven with branches coated in a mix of mud, straw, and animal dung. Yes, dung. It's an adhesive, an insulator, and always available. You wouldn't call this premium interior design, but on a winter night, when every crevice is sealed with that pungent blend, you know you did the right thing. A strange fact? Many families even smeared fresh dung onto their walls at the start of winter, casually called putting a warm coat on the house. The smell? Oh yes. But it also repelled rats, retained heat, and made sure uninvited guests didn't drop by. And that idyllic-looking thatched roof? Not so charming. After a few seasons of rain and snow, the thatch became a strategic weak point. Water would seep through, rats would climb up, sparrows would nest. In the cold season, you'd get icy drops landing on your forehead, each one a gentle reminder that you lived in an era without home warranties. How did people back then deal with it? They patched the roof with anything they could find: old cloth, animal hides, fresh bundles of straw, even the youngest child's shoe lining, since the shoe was falling apart anyway. And when there was nothing left to patch with, they placed pots, pans, and dried coconut shells all around the house, not to catch blessings from heaven, but to catch water, dripping all night long. Academic debate? Absolutely. Some archaeologists argue that sealing homes with mud and manure was a sign of extreme poverty. But others counter that it was a form of climate adaptation, a kind of sustainable local innovation. Recent studies in France and England even show that dung-covered houses retained indoor temperatures 2 to 3 degrees higher than those without it. So, who's laughing now? As for you, you crawl out from under your blanket and quietly stuff a rag into a gap where the wind is whistling in. A sudden huff from the cow, as if in agreement. Then the crackle of the hearth. Then silence. You return to your makeshift pile of covers, pull the cloth up over your ears, and breathe slowly. The wind has calmed. The cold is no longer razor sharp, just a quiet reminder. You haven't won yet, but you're doing pretty well. And while the modern world has silicone, insulation foam, and central heating, you, a resilient medieval soul, are lying inside a handcrafted thermal system that smells but works. Just survive till morning. Everything else can wait. Welcome to the antifreeze dinner of the Middle Ages, where the first rule wasn't delicious, but heavy enough to keep you warm. They believed, and not without reason, that eating a big meal before bed would help the body generate heat, as the stomach worked overnight to digest the food. Modern science half agrees. The digestive process does produce heat, but eating too much, especially heavy food, also increases the chance you'll wake up at 2 a.m. dreaming you've turned into a giant turnip. Little known fact: medieval people consumed fat like it was their personal heater. Pork fat, goose fat, even fermented buffalo butter, all melted and drizzled onto stews, bread, or eaten by itself. Some records from northern England mention mixing animal fat with barley to make a kind of energy porridge before bed. And the most common dish? Pottage, a thick stew of vegetables and grains. Don't imagine potatoes, they hadn't reached Europe yet. Instead, turnips, beets, kale, onions, oats, and a few unidentifiable greens. If you were lucky, a leftover bone from last week's feast made it in too. Scholars still debate whether this was poverty food or smart survival strategy. Some argue medieval people simply ate what they could grow. Others point out that they deliberately chose hard-to-digest meals, because during long winter nights, slow digestion was an advantage. And you, playing the role of a young person curled near the fire, are holding a bowl of molten turnip porridge with a dash of pork fat, catching a faint burning smell, either from the fire or someone's hair. You eat slowly. Your tongue is used to the oily, peppery, lukewarm taste. Not delicious, but it keeps you alive and full. Your mother presses an old barley biscuit into your hand, hard and chewy, but if soaked in the stew, it softens like straw bedding. You eat, not for pleasure, but for survival. Another curious detail, many families treated the late-night meal as a bonding ritual. It wasn't just about eating. They told stories, sang softly, or read psalms aloud if they had a book. No one rushed to sleep. Everyone knew. A full belly was the only guarantee you could close your eyes in the long night ahead. And the night is still long. The wind still howls, but your stomach is working. You feel warmer, not because the house is well insulated, but because inside you, a small furnace is burning, powered by turnips and goose fat. You set down your bowl, pull your cloak up, and crawl back toward the straw pile. While the cold outside waits to strike, you have one final mission: digest successfully. And don't dream of talking turnips. You've just dimmed the fire, not put it out entirely, because letting the fire die completely overnight was a disaster waiting to happen, not just because of the cold. People believed that in total darkness, demons, goblins, and hungry spirits would come. That's why in many villages, a small ember was always kept alive through the night, called the soul guarding fire. It wasn't warm enough for you, but it kept other things away. A little-known fact: many families sprinkled ashes around doorways and drew holy symbols with charcoal on the walls, especially if there were children or the sick in the house. Some even placed a bowl of salt water beside the bed as a kind of spiritual safe zone to prevent the soul from being pulled away during dreams. And as for sleeping posture, not what you'd expect. Medieval people often slept half sitting, propped up. They believed lying flat was the position of the dead, and sleeping like that could accidentally invite something you didn't mean to. In some regions of Europe, especially after the Black Death, families would prop themselves up with straw pillows or chairs, sleeping sitting up to avoid being taken by mistake. Academics are divided. Some say this posture was born out of post-plague superstition. Others argue it made perfect sense, reducing cold exposure and reflux in drafty rooms with overstuffed stomachs. A light-hearted jab? One modern historian joked, "Medieval people didn't just sleep as if they were about to die. They did everything possible to ensure that if they did die in their sleep, no one would mistake them for a witch." You, a humble 14th century villager, murmur your final prayer. "Lord, keep my soul safe through the night, and if I don't wake tomorrow, may it not be colder than today." You place a cloth sack over your face, not to sleep better, but to keep your nose warm and to prevent your soul from escaping through your breath. In some regions, people believed the soul could float out through the nostrils if not covered. Sounds like legend? Maybe. But on a cold night, when the wind howls with eerie voices, anything that helps you sleep without nightmares is welcome. Outside, a dog howls, a cow shifts, the thatch creaks above, and you, caught between this world and another no one is sure you can return from, pull the blanket higher, hand clutching the bowl of salt water in the dark, thinking, "I've done all the rituals. If the cold doesn't get me, may the spirits leave me be." Wonderful. Now this time, imagine you're not indoors, but outside at 3 a.m. in wind that bites your face because nature calls. You fumble your way toward the cowshed, feet stepping through muddy straw holding a dim oil lamp. Not because you enjoy connecting with nature, but because in the Middle Ages, toilets weren't inside the house. They were draughty huts, essentially a low-grade version of an outdoor spa, minus the water, lighting, or privacy. A curious fact? Many villages didn't have fixed toilets. People used wooden chamber pots, then dumped them in the garden, or, for wealthier homes, into a shared waste pit behind the house. In winter, those pots were so cold that people had to pre-warm them with blankets, no joke, or else face the very real threat of a midstream freeze, literally. And then came a bizarre but real invention, a seat with a hole placed directly over a snow pit. In parts of Northern Europe, even children were encouraged to use this natural system to build resilience. On the flip side, many medieval folks feared squatting too long in the dark, believing evil spirits could rise up from the earth and enter you while you were defenseless, which is probably why short prayers were said before, well, business. Academic debate? Some texts claim the wealthy had privies inside castle towers, using gravity and straw to manage waste, called the garderobe. But historians still argue over whether that was truly sanitary, or just an attempt to romanticize the historical stink. You, still out in the cold, working, praying your oil lamp doesn't go out, glancing around just in case something moves. A cat slinks past and nearly gives you a heart attack. You exhale in relief. But then, suddenly, you feel the wind rising from the pit. You finish your business quickly, run inside, pull your cloak tightly over your head, and shiver, whether from cold, fear, or both. And just like that, something as mundane as going to the toilet becomes a full-on survival quest in the dead of a medieval winter. Welcome to medieval cold weather fashion, where the only rule is if you own it, wear it. No matter how it smells. No fancy fur coats, no thermal gloves, just a linen underlayer, possibly unwashed since the autumn fair, a stiff wool cloak as scratchy as straw mats, and over everything, a faded, grease-soaked sheepskin. If you're lucky, your mother will hand you a cloth to tie over your head, not for fashion, but to keep your ears from freezing off. Strange fact, many people didn't wash clothes in winter. Not out of laziness, but out of belief. Washing off the dirt layer could make you sick. After a while, your linen would develop a coating of body oil, soot, mud, and animal fat, what they considered natural insulation, a kind of survival armor woven not by hand, but by time. And don't forget the odd stuff. In some parts of Northern Europe, people fought the cold by smearing goose fat on their feet and wrapping them in rabbit fur. Children were greased up before bedtime, much like marinated roast chickens, just hopefully without dogs in the house. Academic debate? Certainly. Some researchers argue that medieval folk weren't dirty by the standards of their time, just living by the conditions and beliefs of their era. But other records note that the lower classes wore garments so old the fabric cracked like dry soil, and the winter stench inside homes could wake the dead, if any were around. You, wrapped in 3 layers of fabric, a layer of fat, and the smoky scent of firewood, sit near the hearth, cupping your hands over your mouth to keep warm. Your clothes aren't soft, they aren't fragrant, but you're alive. And this morning, that's all that matters. A little joke? You could say medieval fashion never went out of style because it never had a style to begin with. You yawn. The long night is almost over, and you, bundled up like an onion buried in dirt, close your eyes. From the cow stall, someone turns over and wheezes. Maybe the blacksmith, maybe the pig. It doesn't matter. As long as you're still breathing, it's a win. Now you're sitting inside your own home, a place where you both live and silently battle the cold, like you're fighting a wind dragon with cow dung and dry straw. Sounds odd? Welcome to medieval survival architecture. No bricks, no double-glazed windows, and definitely no insulation. Instead, your house is made of wattle and daub, woven wood lattices plastered with a mix of clay, straw, and cow dung. Yes, dung, but don't laugh. It holds heat surprisingly well, and it's free. In winter, you don't need to smell nice, you need to survive. Little known trick, in some rural areas, people mixed human hair into the wall plaster because hair made it stick and last longer. So if your walls start shedding during the rainy season, that's not mystical. It's just very human construction. And your front door? Just a few wooden planks, crudely nailed together, creaking like grandpa rolling over. You've just returned from the chicken coop, arms full of eggs, feet muddy, and you nudge a clump of straw into the doorframe to block the night wind, sharp as a pin, not to keep out thieves. In this era, the wind is the thief. Your floor, packed dirt. When dry, hard as stone. When damp, slick as goose grease. You cover it with old straw, unchanged since the harvest fair. The smell is just a little rich, but you're used to it. In fact, that straw scent might be the only thing that makes the house feel alive. Overhead, the thatched roof is dark with soot. After rain, it leaks. Mice nest there. Sometimes you'll even find a sleeping bat among the ashes. You don't scream, you just step back, wrap another scarf around your head and think, tonight I won't sleep alone. A lighthearted jab? If you lived in a medieval house, the wind wouldn't just slip through the door. It might bring along its cousins and a whole sparrow family for a sleepover. And so you sit again by the hearth, where the last embers glow faintly, but still whisper one final message at the end of the day. Hold on, you're still alive. Even if the walls smell like dung, even if the roof houses rats, and even if the floor creaks every time you shift in bed, that house is still the one place in the dead of winter that you can call a safe haven. The medieval fireplace, in case you didn't know, wasn't a stylish centerpiece in the living room for sipping cocoa and reading books. It was a survival hub, the physical and spiritual heart of the entire home. No cast iron stoves, no picturesque chimneys, just a pit in the ground, lined with stones, with a cast iron pot hanging above, and underneath, the place where you prayed that the ash would be thick enough to keep the coals alive till morning. Keeping the fire alive, it was a real art. Before going to bed, you'd carefully mound ash over the glowing embers, a technique called fire banking. The ash acted as insulation, preserving warmth throughout the night. Get it wrong, and you'd wake up the next morning in a walk-in freezer made of mud and wind. And yes, with the chicken still squawking in your ear. Fun fact, poor families who couldn't afford enough firewood burned dried dung from cows, sheep, or any grass-eating animal. The smell was distinct, but it burned slowly and held embers well. Who needs essential oils when you can smoke your home with the essence of pasture land? And if you were lucky, you could use heating stones, flat rocks heated until glowing, then wrapped in old cloth and placed in the straw bed, like a prehistoric hot water bottle. Miscalculate, and you'd set the bed on fire. But done right, you'd stay warm all night, or at least keep your toes from freezing into turnips. Some people even slept next to the hearth, rotating spots nightly like soldiers on watch. Children were given priority closest to the fire. The elderly, with brittle bones, were padded with extra straw. And you, if you weren't near the hearth, had to hope the cow sleeping in the same room would turn to face you. Because a cow's breath is so warm that, as the folk saying goes, one cow is worth 3 blankets. Sounds strange, but in the medieval winter, staying warm wasn't a comfort, it was a belief. A belief that if you got it right, banked the fire, placed the stone, angled the cow, you'd wake up in the morning still able to move your toes. A light joke? If you've ever hugged an electric heating pad and still felt cold, try hugging a live cow. Our ancestors had a 1,000-year head start on that idea. You pull the blanket close, listening to the wind outside, howling like whispers down a chimney. The fire still flickers. The house is quiet. Only the steady breathing remains, from your family, the chickens, the cow, and sometimes from yourself, balanced delicately between survival and solidifying. The night is long, and you still have one more silent comrade in the fight against the cold, the living animals inside the house. Let's be clear, this wasn't the cute kind of animal companionship. No cats in sweaters, no dogs in beds. Here, cows, goats, pigs, and chickens were your winter roommates. Why? Because they radiated heat. And you radiated cold. It wasn't romantic, it was practical. If the cow's breath turned to fog, your survival dream might be evaporating with it. Little known fact, in many European peasant homes, the human sleeping area was separated from the livestock pen by just a thin wooden divider, or sometimes not separated at all. You'd sleep on one side while the cow chewed hay on the other. Chickens roosted in the rafters, and pigs sprawled in the middle of the room like part of the furniture. Some families even let goats climb into bed, not because they wanted to, but because the dirt floor was so cold that even a leaf-eating creature refused to sleep on it. Makes the fairy tale The Three Billy Goats gruff sound a bit more logical now, doesn't it? You're lying curled up when suddenly, pfft, a strange noise from the corner of the room. Not a ghost. It's the pig. You groan softly, pulling your cloak over your head. Then, clack, clack. A chicken jumps down from the beam into your straw bed. Maybe it wants to share your blanket. Maybe it thinks you're a nest. A light joke? If you've ever complained about your roommate turning the lights on at 2 a.m., try living with a cow that chews cud all night and a chicken with a completely broken circadian rhythm. Of course, not everyone was comfortable with this shared living arrangement. But in the bone-piercing cold of a medieval winter, warmth didn't come from a fireplace. It came from breath. Human breath, chicken breath, pig breath. Back then, there were no hot water bottles to hug in bed. There were cow bottles, pig pillows, and chicken lanterns. Whenever the wind slipped through the wall cracks, you pulled your blanket tighter, shut your eyes, and silently gave thanks that the animal beside you was still breathing. And even if, come morning, you found a little poop in your shoes, you were still awake, still alive, and still capable of laughing. Perfect. So this morning, you open your eyes, not because you slept well, but because a rooster just crowed right next to your ear, and a goat seems to have licked your hair while searching for hay. You didn't wake up, you were woken. Dim light seeps through the stretched animal skin over the small door frame. The cold air hits your face like claws. Before your brain can even begin to think about breakfast, your body whispers, just 5 more minutes. But your back already aches, and the straw underneath you feels like a week-old loaf of bread. You sit up. Your blanket is a thick piece of wool, heavy with the smell of fireplace smoke, sheep fat, and something else you don't want to identify. You peel it off like the skin of an onion, layer after layer. With each layer, your knees crack like dry twigs snapping in the forest. You slide your feet down to the ground and touch the packed dirt, so cold your skin screams in silence. For a few seconds, you wonder if you still have all your toes. Good news? You do. Bad news? They're refusing to function. A faint sound comes from the hearth. Your heart jumps. Are the coals still alive? You rush over, brush aside the gray ash. Yes, a glowing dot of red. Still burning. You breathe a sigh of relief, not just because there will be fire, but because you won't have to walk to the neighbor's house at dawn, pot in hand, head bowed like you're begging to settle a debt. A light joke. A medieval morning wasn't measured by clocks. It was measured by how cold the stone felt beneath your backside and how loud the rooster screamed in your ear. You drag yourself outside. The air out there is even colder than inside, as if the sky had dumped its entire stockpile of frost onto the world overnight. Your breath turns to smoke. The wind slaps your face like a palm made of ice leaves. But you smile, because smiling feels a little warmer. And because medieval folks had one unspoken rule, anyone who could still smile in the morning was a survivor. You look toward the cowshed. It exhales steam like a walking kettle. The chickens are scratching at the dirt. The pig is yawning. And you're dreaming of a bowl of hot barley porridge, though you already know today's breakfast will probably just be a dried onion and leftover broth from last night. And just like that, you've made it through another night. Not because you're strong, but because you've learned how to survive the cold with every breath, every tug of the blanket, and every ember left glowing in the ash. You've just boiled some water, or more accurately, lightly warmed water that hopefully won't freeze, using the last bits of firewood from the night before and a few scraps of straw sputtering in the hearth. The old chipped iron pot bubbles weakly, like it's shivering with you. This morning's menu? A bowl of barley porridge, if you're lucky. If not, it's a dried onion and a scrap of stale bread the rats must have rejected last night. The food had to be simple, but heavy enough to keep you warm from the inside. People back then ate to survive, not to post on social media. Little known fact, barley wasn't just cheap, it was a gut-heating furnace. When you swallow that first spoonful, slightly thick, slightly burnt, but still warm, your body lets out a subtle sigh of thank God. Butter? Probably not. But if you had a bit of animal fat left from a few months ago, maybe slightly turned by now, then today was a special day. Fat equals energy equals survival. And the children? They got dibs on the burnt crust stuck to the bottom of the pot, crunchy, smoky, and hard to chew. But the kids loved it. The only thing better than a blanket against the cold was a warm belly. A light joke? Back then, a dish wasn't burnt because the cook was careless. It wasn't good until it was burnt. You sit around the hearth, bowl in hand, your back resting against the packed earth wall. No one talks much. The cold doesn't like words, but everyone is silently grateful that they don't have to gnaw on tree roots or chew wild grass this morning. A sip of lukewarm water to finish. Then everyone stands, ties their scarves tight, and heads out to the fields, the forests, the frost-covered meadows, because life waits for no one, and winter is never patient. Breakfast ends in silence, but every spoonful of porridge, every crumb of bread is a tiny brick laid down to build one more day of survival. You step outside and the wind smacks you in the face like a slap from an angry grandmother. The air is so biting, your nose is contemplating falling off just to escape the misery. You pull your coat tighter, not a fancy insulated jacket or sleek Norwegian knit. Just 2 or 3 layers of rough wool topped with a smoke-scented cloak frayed at the shoulders. And just as you think you're warm enough, you realize what's missing is straw. Yes, an old traditional trick most modern people have never heard of. Dry straw was stuffed inside the innermost layer of clothing as a natural form of insulation. Wearing straw? That was medieval Gore-Tex for peasants. It wasn't stylish, It wasn't elegant, but when the wind slapped your side and you didn't freeze to death, you knew you had won a small round in the war against winter. That's not all. If you were heading out to the fields, you might carry a heated clay stone wrapped in old cloth and stuff it into your shoe. Sounds crazy? Maybe. But back then, it was called earth heating your heels. Simple, free, and enough to keep your toes attached until noon. Fun fact, some farmers tied leather straps tightly around their thighs or waist, not for fashion, but to keep blood flowing stronger to the upper body, where alertness mattered most. It was a form of DIY blood pressure regulation, a crude but clever way to fight the cold, and you never went alone. There was always a dog. Not a hunting dog, not a chained guard dog, but a heat dog. It ran ahead to scout the road, curled up next to you during breaks, and when you were shivering, it became a breathing fireball. A light joke? Back then, a dog wasn't just your best friend. It was a four-legged hot water bottle that barked. You walk through the mist, wind lashing your face like a whip. Your hands are hidden inside your sleeves, and you breathe shallowly, so as not to inhale frost into your lungs. Every step is a negotiation between reason and weather, but you still walk, because there are potatoes to dig, firewood to gather, and a life waiting to be held onto, one breath at a time. First task of the day, gathering manure. It doesn't sound appealing, but in the Middle Ages it was both essential and, oddly, warm. Don't laugh. In a world without coal or electricity, dried dung was humanity's first renewable fuel. You grip a wooden shovel, wearing burlap gloves, basically useless, and head toward the steaming compost heap that rises like nature's own furnace. You bend down and, oh God, it's warm, not spa warm. But after 10 minutes of shivering, the sensation of your hands reviving in a pile of damp manure is something you learn not to mock. Little known fact, in some regions, people even shaped manure into cakes, dried them on the house walls, and stacked them for use all year. Your house might not have much, but it could have a manure pantry outside the porch. You work in silence. The wind howls through leafless trees. Chickens scratch in the distance. A goat is eating your blanket, again. But you don't get angry, because when you're holding a warm dung patty in your hand, life feels a little less cruel. A light joke? Nothing reminds you you're alive quite like stepping in a warm pile of manure on a winter morning. Then comes wood chopping. You bring your axe to the damp wood pile and ask yourself, will I chop enough today to survive tonight? Every swing is a whispered prayer. Please don't break the handle. Please don't break the axe. Please don't break my hand. Wood wasn't for luxury bonfires or scented candles. Every log was a ticket to dinner and toes that might survive another night. The more you gather, the warmer the fire, and the more likely your body stays intact until dawn. You return home with your back damp from fog, hands covered in soot and mud, but you have manure to dry, wood to burn, and a quiet feeling in your chest that you've won a small victory over winter. And then it's midday. No alarm clock, no biohacking smartwatch, just the moment your stomach starts yelling louder than the wind outside. You drop your shovel, wipe your hands on your pants, as if that made them cleaner, and shuffle home. The house is dark, smells of smoke, sheep fat, and family. The hearth glows faintly. On it, a large pot of soup, which is actually turnip water with a few beans and a pork bone gnawed 3 meals ago, is bubbling away. Everyone gathers, eyes tired, backs bent. But in that moment, they are a team, the survival team. You sit in your usual spot. The straw bedding is still warm from the morning, thanks to a loyal dog or the last trace of grandma's body heat. A light joke? Back then, a warm seat wasn't a luxury. It just meant you sat after a cow. The soup is shared into wooden bowls. No one complains. No one asks for more salt. Because salt is a luxury, stored like gold. Is there stale bread? Yes, it's broken into 3, soaked in the soup until soft, then eaten like it's gourmet cuisine. Little known fact, some people secretly tucked hot stones under their clothes during meals to keep their stomachs warm. Not to help with digestion, but to trick the brain into thinking, I've eaten a lot. People chatted, not much, not loudly. They told old stories, mentioned the neighbors, teased the children, and occasionally glanced out the door as if to make sure it wasn't snowing yet. Because if the snow started falling, no one would be able to go anywhere that afternoon, and that night the hearth would have to keep the entire family alive. After the meal, Nap time. But not the kind you're thinking of. You didn't have a private room, your own bed, or even a neck pillow. You had a spot in a corner near the straw pile, or, if you were lucky, near the warm, fermenting heap of cow dung. Sounds strange? To a medieval person, sleeping beside cow manure wasn't gross. It was smart, because it was warm. Because it let you doze off during a freezing afternoon without shivering like a soaked dog. And because in a life this harsh, you learn to be thankful for simple things, like getting 15 minutes of rest without freezing through your skin. You close your eyes, the wind still howls outside. But here, beside a small flame and the steady breathing of your family, you find a little peace. A brief warmth in a cold that cuts to the bone. You wake up when a gust of wind slips through the wall, cracks, and blows out the fire with a whoosh. Someone in the house mumbles, Grandma coughs, and you know. It's afternoon. The roof, made of thatch or bundled straw, after a season of rain and snow, has begun to leak like it's crying over its own life. So, task number 1 for the afternoon, patch the roof. You climb up with a few handfuls of straw, a dull knife, and the thin hope that you won't slip and become the first human stew in village history. Carefully, you stuff straw into the gaps, tie it down with twine, and if you're lucky, don't see a rat head poking up from the roof. Fun fact, people used to mix mud and animal hair into the roof patching paste to make it waterproof. Goat hair, not just for socks, but for sealing leaks. Yes, socks and roofs, the two places where you really don't want water to get in. After the roof, it's time to patch your shoes. Your wooden clogs or coarse fabric shoes have worn through at the heel. You cut a scrap of old cloth, add a bit of dry grass for cushioning, then stitch it all up with hemp thread, the kind that can pierce leather hide, or your hand if you're not careful. After patching, your shoes may not hurt more, but they definitely won't feel any softer. A light joke? Medieval shoes usually fit one of two things, your foot or the will of God. Rarely both at the same time. Evening falls. The light filtering through the gaps in the wooden walls begins to fade. While waiting for dinner, meaning the watery remains of lunch, you and a few others sit near the fire, knitting wool or mending baskets. Every task is a way to fight off the hopelessness of winter stretching on. And then someone starts telling a story, not a cheerful one, a ghost story. Not to frighten, but to keep the mind alert as darkness descends. Because when the outside world is cold, fear is sometimes what keeps you warm. You hear about the old woman in the fur hat who walks along the stream whenever someone is about to die, about the shadow at the village's edge who never speaks, only watches. And if you dare look back, but you don't, you just pull your straw blanket tighter around your shoulders. Outside, the wind begins to shift. Night is coming, and with it, another battle, not fought with swords and spears, but with firewood, embers, and whatever warmth your breath can give. You've had dinner, or rather, you've shared the last diluted ladle of soup with a piece of bread as hard as brick. No one speaks much. At this point in the day, every word feels as heavy as frozen stone. The wind whistles through the roof, and suddenly the ghost story from earlier doesn't feel like a joke anymore. The adults begin preparing for the most important task of the night, keeping the fire alive. No lighters, no matches, and definitely no gas burners. The fire is tended like the soul of the house itself. One person, usually the oldest, or the one who sleeps the least, will stay up to guard the embers. That means gently covering the glowing coals with ash, creating an insulating blanket to stop the fire from dying. It sounds simple, but one strong gust of wind, or too much ash, and by morning you'll wake up in bitter, hopeless cold. And if the fire dies, get ready to strike flint, pray hard, and shiver until midday. A strange fact? Some households kept a special soapstone or heat-retaining crystal, which they'd heat at night, wrap in cloth, and place at the center of the room. Not enough to warm the whole space, but enough to keep the heart of anyone nearby from going cold. You curl up in a straw blanket, nestled between your siblings, grandparents, and a chicken wheezing softly beside your ear. Sleeping with animals wasn't unusual. Dogs, cats, even goats, all were walking heaters. You didn't choose your sleeping spot based on preference. You were wedged wherever there was just enough space and just enough warmth. The problem? If you were on the edge, next to the wall, you could feel the cold creep in like a ghost brushing down your spine. A light joke? Back then, the middle spot wasn't a privilege. It was the highest survival zone. Before blowing out the lamp wick, not switching off a light, the whole family prays quietly. No loud words, no long rosaries, just a whispered line close to the ear of whoever lies beside you. Lord, let us all wake together tomorrow morning. Because you know, this winter, not everyone will. You close your eyes, the wind howls, the fire crackles, your family breathes steadily, and in the middle of it all, you, a small warm dot in a 1,000-year-long frozen night. You lie still for a few seconds, listening, still the sound of breathing around you, still a faint pop from the fire. Thankfully, the embers are still alive. No violent coughing, seems like grandma's okay, but the cold, it creeps into the cracks of your fingers, your toes, like a frosty hand brushing each person as it passes through. You sit up slowly, lift the straw blanket, and right then the scent hits you. Dried cow dung, hearth smoke, and sleepy chicken breath, all at once, like a warm embrace from the medieval world itself. First step of the day, check the fire. You walk over to the hearth, brush away the ash, and there it is, a soft red glow. You breathe out in relief. Another day of survival has begun. No need to strike a new flame. No need to go to the neighbor's house begging for embers. Little known fact, there was a custom. If a household's fire went out, the person sent to request embers from a neighbor had to remain silent, not a single word, as if words themselves might scare the fire away with their coldness. You open the front door, not a sturdy cinematic door, but a heavy slab of rough wood covered in animal hide and a patch of old oilcloth. And then you see it. Snow. A thin layer on the roof, on the fence, and on footprints, not human, not dog. Wolf tracks. You don't panic. This happens. But when you see the prints pressed right up against the door as if the creature had sniffed through every crack, you shiver. Not from fear, but because you know, a hungry wolf doesn't care about creaky wood or soft doors. It only needs to hear a cough. A light joke? Wolves back then didn't need GPS. They just needed to smell yesterday's soup. You step back inside and shut the door tightly. Today there will be more to do. Reinforce the pen, scatter ash around the house, and tread carefully when going out. But first, you take an iron poker, stir the embers, and start the morning soup pot. Not to eat yet, but to let the smell of smoke and dry onions push back the shadows creeping into the corners of the house. And that's when you notice the neighbor's chimney has no smoke. By now, you should have already smelled the familiar burning scent from their soup pot. The old woman there often falls asleep while cooking. But this morning, nothing. You throw on your cloak. Your wooden clogs clack across the snow. Their door is shut. No footprints, no coughing. You knock softly. No answer. Then you open it. Inside, cold. So cold your breath turns to mist on the ceiling, and they're still alive, but huddled under blankets, shivering, red-eyed, without fire. The oldest person in the village hears first. Then quickly the entire hamlet gathers. No one discusses it. Everyone brings what they have: wood, coals, animal fat, even a leftover pot of soup from yesterday. One brings straw, another brings an oil lamp. This isn't charity, it's survival. Because today is the coldest day of the month, and if no one helps, there will be fewer people tomorrow. Historical note? In many 14th, 15th century European villages, harsh winters forced communities to sleep together in blacksmith shops or churches where heat from the forge lingered. Evening falls. The wind howls like it's summoning something old and starving. A decision is made. Tonight, everyone will sleep in the baker's house, the only place with a still burning oven. No one objects. Children are thrilled. The elderly quietly roll up straw blankets. You and your parents pack what you can into burlap sacks, lead the chickens and the goat, and head out like you're moving homes, even if it's just for one night. The baker's house glows in the pitch-black village. You step inside and gentle laughter fills the room, rare as sunlight in a snowstorm. The scent of old bread, burning wood, and human warmth blends into something alive, comforting, and real. A light joke? No one expected the warmest moment of the month to come from a bakery oven no one's cleaned in 3 years. That night, everyone sleeps close, like sardines in a can, laughing, whispering, and telling stories you're not supposed to share under a full moon. Stories about the woman with long hair who appears in water mirrors, about the shadow standing in the cemetery even though no one entered, about a child who was never born yet still knocks at the door each winter. No one dares laugh too loud, but no one dares step outside the circle either. You close your eyes. Outside, snow falls. Inside, the fire glows red, breaths rise and fall in rhythm, and there is a rare feeling: safety. Not because the world outside has grown kinder, but because tonight you are not alone. The snow began to melt the night before. You heard water dripping from the roof like a strange new drum beat. Not the sound of wind, not the crackle of embers, but the sound of the earth thawing. Wolf tracks. You don't panic. This happens. But when you see the prints pressed right up against the door as if the creature had sniffed through every crack, you shiver. Not from fear, but because you know, a hungry wolf doesn't care about creaky wood or soft doors. It only needs to hear a cough. A light joke? Wolves back then didn't need GPS. They just needed to smell yesterday's soup. You step back inside and shut the door tightly. Today there will be more to do. Reinforce the pen, scatter ash around the house, and tread carefully when going out. But first, you take an iron poker, stir the embers, and start the morning soup pot. Not to eat yet, but to let the smell of smoke and dry onions push back the shadows creeping into the corners of the house. And that's when you notice the neighbor's chimney has no smoke. By now, you should have already smelled the familiar burning scent from their soup pot. The old woman there often falls asleep while cooking. But this morning, nothing. You throw on your cloak. Your wooden clogs clack across the snow. Their door is shut. No footprints, no coughing. You knock softly. No answer. Then you open it. Inside, cold. So cold your breath turns to mist on the ceiling, and they're still alive, but huddled under blankets, shivering, red-eyed, without fire. The oldest person in the village hears first. Then quickly the entire hamlet gathers. No one discusses it. Everyone brings what they have: wood, coals, animal fat, even a leftover pot of soup from yesterday. One brings straw, another brings an oil lamp. This isn't charity, it's survival. Because today is the coldest day of the month, and if no one helps, there will be fewer people tomorrow. Historical note: in many 14th, 15th century European villages, harsh winters forced communities to sleep together in blacksmith shops or churches where heat from the forge lingered. Evening falls. The wind howls like it's summoning something old and starving. A decision is made. Tonight, everyone will sleep in the baker's house, the only place with a still burning oven. No one objects. Children are thrilled. The elderly quietly roll up straw blankets. You and your parents pack what you can into burlap sacks, lead the chickens and the goat, and head out like you're moving homes, even if it's just for one night. The baker's house glows in the pitch-black village. You step inside and gentle laughter fills the room, rare as sunlight in a snowstorm. The scent of old bread, burning wood, and human warmth blends into something alive, comforting, and real. A light joke? No one expected the warmest moment of the month to come from a bakery oven no one's cleaned in 3 years. That night, everyone sleeps close, like sardines in a can, laughing, whispering, and telling stories you're not supposed to share under a full moon. Stories about the woman with long hair who appears in water mirrors, about the shadow standing in the cemetery even though no one entered, about a child who was never born yet still knocks at the door each winter. No one dares laugh too loud, but no one dares step outside the circle either. You close your eyes. Outside, snow falls. Inside, the fire glows red, breaths rise and fall in rhythm, and there is a rare feeling: safety. Not because the world outside has grown kinder, but because tonight you are not alone. The snow began to melt the night before. You heard water dripping from the roof like a strange new drum beat. Not the sound of wind, not the crackle of embers, but the sound of the earth thawing. You continue sowing, by hand, by hope. An elder once said, if you hum while planting, the seeds will hear and grow better. You don't really believe it, but you still murmur something that resembles a song. A light joke? If seeds could hear, they'd probably be shaking their heads at your off-key humming. But it doesn't matter, you planted them. That's enough. By afternoon, you look around, rows of neat furrows, sun-darkened faces, dirt-caked hands, and not many words. This spring isn't a season of beginnings, it's a season of second chances. A season to test if faith can still bloom. You return to the village as the sun dips. The smell of mud follows you all the way to your straw bed. And that night, as you sleep, you dream of a golden field. The wind blows, the swallows fly high, and your grandmother smiles with both rows of teeth. You remember clearly, she passed last winter. You're now standing in the field you sowed in spring. The sun rises early and bakes your thoughts dry. Sweat evaporates before it even touches your skin. And the first thing you notice isn't the green of rice, but the weeds. Fast-growing weeds like they've got their own plan for world domination. You bend down to pull. Each one is rooted deep, as if it knew you were coming. You curse under your breath gently, because in times like these, weeds are more stubborn than debt. Historical context? In much of Central Europe, irrigation was regulated by water-sharing hours, an old oral law based on the sun's position, church bells, or the intuition of the great-grandfather who kept the canal key. And then it happens. You're watering your plot when your neighbor shouts from across the field. It's his turn, his time. You've crossed the line, but you know this is shared water, and you know he came 10 minutes early, just 10 minutes. But in a survival summer, 10 minutes can mean the difference between grain and straw. Little known fact. There were once villages that built an actual earth court, a raised mound in the village center, just to settle disputes over tree shadows. Because at noon, if a tree's shadow fell across someone's field, that person was accused of stealing moisture. You watch the shadow stretch from an old oak falling right on the edge of your plot. And you understand, shade in this era isn't for cooling down. It's an accusation. You decide to step back, not because you were wrong, but because today you're tired. And because deep down you believe this season isn't just a test of the soil, it's a test of character. A light joke? If you think modern drama only happens in group chats, you clearly haven't seen two medieval farmers arguing over the right to stand under a tree. Evening falls. The fields begin to smell of trampled grass, evaporating water, and tender straw. You sit down, drink from a leather pouch, and reflect. Surviving might not be as hard as surviving next to someone. You return to the village before dusk. Children chase chickens. The elderly wave fans made from pot lids. And there you see your neighbor, sitting at his doorstep, holding a cup of water, and giving you a small, silent nod. No one says a word. But that kind of silence is a miracle of peace. You're standing in the field. Your hands aren't holding a hoe or a sickle. They're still. Because something else needs to be heard first. The rice is breathing. No, it's not your imagination. People once believed that rice, or wheat, makes a faint sound when it's ripe. A tiny crackling, a gentle dryness, a soft whisper, a kind of sigh from the grain after months of struggling. At night, children are not allowed outside, not because of snow, but because of the whispered ghost tale of the long shadow, a spirit said to take anyone who plays after the first rooster's crow. You know it's just something adults made up to keep kids quiet. But honestly, even you sometimes don't dare go out. And then one night, the only elder who has lived through 3 consecutive winters says, to survive winter, you don't just need firewood, you need laughter. One laugh a day keeps your blood flowing. You believe him. Because this year, in the aching cold, you still have a glowing hearth. You still hear knocking at the door. You still hear stories. You still smell simple soup. And you still have yourself surviving not by accident, but by will, and a pile of small tricks that sound like jokes. You're sitting around the fire with neighbors. Outside, the wind hammers the walls, as if winter is screaming one last time before being replaced. But inside, it's warm and glowing as if someone opened a door to childhood. This is the night of wishes. Historical fact? Many medieval European communities held New Year ceremonies in late January or early February, often tied to Imbolc or Candlemas, a time that marked the moment when light began to overcome darkness. In your village, people write their wishes on birch bark or dry charcoal, toss them into the fire, and close their eyes to whisper their hopes. You do the same. But instead of wishing for a good harvest, you quietly write, "Let no one walk alone this year." A strange tradition few know about. Some communities used potatoes for fortune-telling. They threw a potato into the coals and watched. If it burned evenly, the skin blistering gently, the year will go smoothly. If it popped loudly, an argument is coming. If it burns unevenly on one side, a secret is about to be revealed. If it survives more than 30 minutes, someone is holding on to an unspoken prayer. You toss the potato into the fire. It doesn't pop, but it doesn't burn evenly either. You stare at the glowing embers and think, maybe the future is like that potato. Never perfect, but always something to chew on. A light joke? If potatoes knew they were being used every year as reluctant fortune tellers, they'd probably demand a raise, paid in salt. The elders tell ghost stories. Children draw demon faces in charcoal and press them to each other's foreheads. And you just sit there, listening. Because you know, when people tell stories, it means they still believe they have a future. As the fire begins to fade, each household sprinkles ash outside their door, a kind of invisible protection to keep evil from stepping into the new year. You watch the ash rise, the wind blowing it away, and you understand ash doesn't protect anything, but it reminds you that all pain, too, will eventually drift, lighten, and be carried away. You go to bed. No ceremony. But you lie on softer straw than last year, sleep in a house sturdier than the season before, and carry with you a half-burned wish still glowing quietly in your heart. You wake, not from the rooster, not from the wind, but because something is blooming. Not in the yard, but somewhere inside your chest. A feeling both light and strange, as if your body were becoming soft soil, ready for something new to take root. Spring in your village isn't just the season of crops, it's the season of sowing people. Historical fact? After a long winter and the first of year festivals, many European villages began their marriage season in early spring, not just to increase labor in the fields, but because most babies were born during harvest time. You could call it a very natural population plan. You see this more clearly than ever when the girl next door suddenly starts wearing a red embroidered scarf, a subtle signal that she's being noticed. You don't ask anyone, but you know, because the boy who used to stand alone at the village well isn't alone anymore. And then one morning, the village elder woman says softly, "The season when no one wants to be alone has come." Little known tradition? In many old rural regions, couples didn't immediately hold grand weddings. They participated in a ritual called hand fasting, where they'd tie a cord around their wrists in front of the community, a temporary union lasting 1 year and 1 day. If they were still together after that, then they'd marry. You think it's strange, but also fair in a way. Another morning, you hear that someone has left the village, not to marry, but to take seasonal work in another region, because their family was running out of food. Their mother sent them off with a handful of sun-dried rice wrapped in an old shirt. No tears, just a single sentence. When you go, remember to smile. Don't let the cold slip between your teeth. You watch their figure disappear beyond the hill and realize spring doesn't only bring new people, it also takes old ones away. A light joke? If spring had a voice, it would probably laugh and whisper, "Incoming romantic drama." At night, you sit with your father. He doesn't speak much. But today, strangely, he says, "The earth is soft this year, and so are people's hearts." You laugh, because you understand, this spring, you're not just waiting for seeds to sprout. You're waiting for a glance, a letter someone forgot to send, or simply a brief touch when two people reach for the same sickle. You're not in love, but you're starting to think, maybe this year you won't be able to avoid it. You're standing in the field, not to admire it, but to work. The sun is no longer the soft gold of fairy tales. It burns straight into your neck, sharp as a reminder, if you're slow, you'll lose the whole season. Summer in your village has always been the busiest time, but this year, it's busy, with too few hands. Historical fact, midsummer in many medieval regions marked the height of harvest season and seasonal recruitment. Lords would send scouts to neighboring villages to borrow labor, and many never returned, whether due to sickness, exhaustion, or simply because they found somewhere warmer to stay. You remember that day, in the shade of an unharvested rice row, 3 of you sat together. Same age, same muddy childhood, same memories of stealing potatoes behind the temple. Now there are only 2. Little known fact, there was a time when every village kept a life cloth, a small piece of fabric marking who was present, who had left for work, and who had not returned. If someone was gone too long, the village elder would burn the cloth to return the person to the earth. No body, no ceremony, just ash and a short phrase. They left without time to say goodbye. You've seen it happen, but you never thought it would be someone whose name you knew. Now you're tying bundles of grain, but in your mind it's not the harvest, It's the lopsided smile of someone you thought would always be beside you on these exhausted summer afternoons. A light joke? If there were a festival called Lying Just to Hurt Less, summer would be the season for a nationwide celebration. The old woman sitting beside the straw sighs, "They didn't leave because this land is poor. They left because somewhere else promised to be less poor." You don't blame them, but you don't stop aching. At night, a fire is lit, not for fun, but to dry straw. You sit by the flames watching potatoes expand, rice ripen, but the human heart has cracks you can't see. You hear someone once returned after 3 winters, but didn't recognize the way back home because the village no longer recognized them either. You think, maybe the hardest part isn't that someone leaves, it's that they no longer have a place to return to. This summer, for the first time, you realize that no one ever teaches you how to say goodbye. You only learn through each harvest season that's missing someone. You're walking down the old dirt path. Leaves don't fall in waves like they do in fairy tales. They fall one by one, as if someone's quietly writing down all the words that never got said. Autumn isn't a beginning. It's a season of taking stock of what remains. Historical fact: in many medieval European communities, autumn was when people checked food stores, redistributed grain, and recorded debts. But beyond rice and wheat, they also tallied gratitude and grievances in a spoken tradition called the weighing of hearts. You used to think that sounded silly. But this year you understand, some debts can't be paid in silver, just in a quiet nod across a fire. Little-known tradition? Some villages held a ritual called ash remembering. Each household would bring ashes from their hearth, pouring them into a shared clay teapot at the village center. Then everyone would drink a sip, not to cleanse karma, like legends say, but simply to remind each other, from old ashes, warmth can still be brewed. You sit, watching your mother bake the first cakes of the season. The scorched scent from the edge of the oven reminds you of the hair of someone who once stood close to you last winter. You don't say anything, but you know your heart still saves a place for someone who didn't return. A light joke? If old lovers are emotional debts, then autumn is the unofficial liquidation season. That afternoon, the village elder says, "Long ago, I waited for someone for 3 seasons. Then I decided to wait for a 4th, not because I had hope, but because I was used to cooking 1 extra bowl of rice." You're not sure you have his patience, but you understand, because you're also baking more than people can eat. At night, the villagers gather. Each person shares something they didn't get around to this year, not to be judged, but to finally breathe.